Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Into Battle with me, Simon Holland-Roberts, and my good friend Phil
Hi.
Baxter.
How you doing?
We're back, and we're back at the Somme. The last one we did, we talked quite extensively about the Somme and the impact that had on the First World War, and now we're going to look at a similar time that we were looking at before. But we're going to go into a bit more detail about another very important phase of the long battle, somewhere that you're very familiar with as a place because you had your feet on the ground down there, and yeah, it's again, this is all brand new to me. The thought of my kind of layman kind of brain version of the Somme was all about trenches and just people in the mud blasting each other is actually way more complex than that. So it's quite fascinating, and I hope you're enjoying the series. Please do comment, like, subscribe, do all that. Thank you very much. And yes, Phil, so where are we now? We've moved on from our first massive mine crater incident.
Yeah, it's more of the same
Right,
but different.
more mining.
More of the same but different.
Okay.
So what's going to be the same? Well, it's the same day. It's the 1st of July. It's the
1st
Battle
of
of the
July.
July.
Wow.
The same armies involved.
Yep.
It's the same plan. We're going to blow up the German lines
Mhm.
with a gigantic explosion, a gigantic mine, and then we're going to walk forward and occupy the trenches.
And then go through the line.
Same, exactly the same. This is this mechanised plan, the Rawlinson plan. We
Right.
are going to, well, Rawlinson stroke Haig. Rawlinson had a slightly different plan, but Haig's kind of modified it to a more smash the front door in plan than Rawlinson's bite and hold sort of thing.
Okay.
So, but we're now in the centre, geographical centre
Mhm.
of the Somme battlefield. The Somme's bisected roughly by a road that goes between two towns, a town called Albert
Mhm.
and a town called Bapaume.
Okay.
And Albert was always held by the British, and Bapaume was always held by the Germans. They were like, if it was paintball, that was like their camp.
Right.
You
Okay.
know,
Okay.
it obviously is like it's a very bad analogy, maybe
Mm,
paintball, but that
but
was
hey.
their camp.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you might see Albert; it might be famous. It was famous for the leaning Madonna on the church in Albert. There was
Okay. Yeah.
the Madonna at the top that was leaning over, and it was fabled that if it fell, the war would end.
Ah.
And then there was a discussion as well, what if it ends and we're on the losing team? So they actually propped it up and stuff. But anyway, so that's where we are in the centre of the battlefield,
Mhm.
on that road. And if you can see on the map we got on the screen there, excuse me, the village of La Boiselle. And La Boiselle is a lovely place today, really nice little village, quite a little hamlet, straight on the road.
Mhm.
But it was a very, very strong German position.
Okay.
And if you, as you'd see on the map, you've got La Boiselle. The plan was that today was slightly different than the Hawthorne Ridge,
Mhm.
because what we're not going to do is we're not going to attack La Boiselle frontally, because if we attack it frontally, we'll get mashed, we'll get duffed up. So what we're going to do is we're going to go around both sides. We're going to go, if you look on the map, you can see it in the black lettering. Above to the north of La Boiselle, you've got Mash Valley. And below La Boiselle, you have Sausage Valley. These two valleys either side of the ridge. And these were anglicised names. They weren't translations of French.
No, thank God.
You know, in that imperialist way that the British have had, they will go to a foreign country and name it for themselves.
Yeah.
So we've got Mash Valley and Sausage Valley. And the idea was that we would use these as avenues of attack and envelop La Boiselle from behind,
Right.
and then carry on up the road, up the ridge road, up to a place called Pozières and off into the green fields beyond.
Right.
There were some mines under La Boiselle, which I might speak about a little bit later. But there's one in particular they'd picked up there. There's a place called Wysap, it was referred to, which is just north of La Boiselle, just north of the road.
Mhm.
But the concern was that the assaulting waves coming up Sausage Valley to the south of La Boiselle would be what we call enfiladed. They would be a bit like at the Hawthorne Ridge. They would be fired across by Germans from a place called the Schwabenhohe, the Swabian Hole.
Swabian Hole.
And I have a map.
Good.
So if you imagine, this is the bit now to the south of La Boiselle.
Okay. Right.
So you can see there the trench lines and the German listening galleries there. This thing called the Schwabenhohe. The north is to the top of the picture.
Yeah.
And the British lines are out on the left. The Lochnagar galleries and Russian saps, as they're called. I don't worry too much about that technicality. And this thing called the Glory Hole. The Glory Hole with the craters in at the top, that is the village of La Boiselle.
Right.
And they were worried that the assaulting battalions would be attacked by this German position, the Schwabenhole, the Swabian Hole.
Right.
Or Swabian Heights, I should say. So they decided, once again, just like Hawthorne Ridge, we'll blow it up.
As you do.
We'll dig some tunnels underneath it and we'll blow it up. So they started digging, about 150 days before the battle. It took that long. And they started hacking their way through the chalk, and they got pretty much under the Schwabenhole. They didn't get all the way under it. They got pretty much under it.
Right.
And the end of the tunnel breaks into two little sections, little Y-shaped sections.
Okay.
They packed these holes with the explosive. They what's called tamp it then. They basically backfill behind it with sandbags.
Okay.
So that when the blast does happen, it blows the thing up rather than just rushing back down the hole.
I get you.
Sort of thing. And then get ready. So they just didn't quite get there,
Right.
but they were ready to go. So on the first day of the Somme, if you can remember the start time, 7:20 if you're Hunter Bunter, but 7:30 for the rest of us. This is the place where they actually detonate at 7:30, well 7:28 or something, 7:29.
Would that be audible from the other one?
Not
audible, but
if it was a quiet day, you definitely hear it. But I'm not 100% sure in the battle.
A few miles away.
Yeah, it's sufficiently over the hills that you wouldn't necessarily directly see it.
I get you.
But they did detonate this one, I think maybe 2 or 3 minutes before 0 hour, because they didn't want the troops to be covered in rubble.
Right, yeah.
And they pulled British troops back from the very front line as well, because the rubble thing. But they pretty much assaulted as it was blown up, and because of that, they didn't have that problem that the Germans.
The Hunter Bunter.
Yeah. The downside is they didn't destroy the positions that were in depth behind the first line, and they didn't destroy other positions that were along the front line because everyone was in deep bunkers. But the planning, the concept was good, but because of other mitigating circumstances, the execution was poor.
Again.
But the real reason why I wanted to come here was not so much to talk about the Lochnagar crater, which when it was made, it was the biggest man-made hole in the world.
What?
Yeah, it was blown up. It's a huge crater.
Do we have a picture of that?
I haven't got a picture here.
I think Matt has. Matt, have you got a picture of that?
It's on the screen. It's on my screen.
That picture is a picture. This is a picture looking from the British lines across what we were just looking at. This is the Lochnagar crater. Yeah, that's what was left after this thing was blown up. That was once.
My God.
In the previous picture, the one that I put on the table, it's flat farmland, and then
it's just flat.
it was just nice, flat, pleasant farmland, chalk downland, a bit like Salisbury Plain, you know,
Okay.
really pleasant. And then they blew a big hole in it, and it was the biggest hole in the world when it was blown up.
Mad.
And
I mean, chalk obviously it isn't like the most stable of rocks.
it's quite good for digging tunnels in. Apparently,
Yeah, of course.
But
It's that's
but
it's going to be stable, but poor. You can get
it'll
in
fracture. Yeah, there's definitely problems with it fracturing and stuff. But one of the things when you look at the crater, which is a bit military nerdy, is what they wanted to do is it's the reason why they split the tunnel at the bottom is they wanted to crater a particular shape. They wanted the spoil that was thrown out of it.
Yeah.
To provide a physical barrier that you couldn't fire a machine gun through.
Okay.
So that you couldn't fire across the crater.
Okay.
They actually made the rim of the crater a bit higher by the nature of the explosion, so that it provided some cover behind it for the troops behind it. But they detonate the crater on time, and they attack on time, but it still doesn't work out well. That's the downside because the fundamental plan was wrong. Like I said, this is from the British lines looking across. I think that's a bit of La Boiselle in the background getting a good pasting. And
what's this from? What's this photo?
This is a photograph from the British lines.
This is an actual.
Yeah, it's a colourised,
colourised
contemporary photo by CJS. I stole it from the internet, and that's looking across towards the village of La Boiselle, which you can see roughly in the middle to far ground and slightly left of centre. Yeah, with some explosions on it, and from let's have it. I'm on the wrong side. I'm over here. From this point.
From that point.
Coming across the village, that's the road that would lead to Albert down here.
Yes.
And then you come across, and this road would lead to Pozières up here. So the Albert to Pozières or Bapaume Road runs across that picture.
Okay.
So it's a very good contemporary picture, really.
And what are these clouds of smoke here?
They're
These
explosions.
artillery.
Yeah, just artillery explosions. And if you look at the ground, it's one of the things that was said about Hawthorne crater when they detonated it. The Germans, one of the German observations was it was like it had snowed because everything was covered in pulverised chalk dust.
Yeah,
So
like...
the original landscape that was brown and soil and whatever is
Yeah.
now just covered in this white dust.
God.
So, and the white lines across the picture are trench lines
Okay.
where they've dug up trenches and the spoil that's come out is chalk.
It's
soil.
How bizarre. Because again, for me, that is just completely an alien to my understanding. You know, I suppose because it's black and white as well. Everything's dark and everything's rainy and sludgy and like kind of brown and horrible. But that picture there is quite.
Well, if you ever go to like a chalk quarry, or a limestone quarry, and you walk around, it's a bit rainy. Everything gets covered in that horrible white toothpastey kind of mess. That's one of the problems the troops had on the Somme when it rained.
Okay.
Was they
were
just
like a
covered in like tile grout.
Right.
They're just covered in like that clayey white sort of horrible mess.
Which is which again that presents its own problems, doesn't it? It's like the gas masks and the kind of the turgid kind of nature of it. What do we kind of learn then from this? What happens next? They've gone through they've kind of blasted this huge crater. They've gone over, but it hasn't been as successful as we'd hoped.
No.
For what reason?
Pretty much the same reasons. The artillery, the fact the Germans have got bunkers, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But that's not really why I wanted to come back. I don't know if you can see the picture we've got here. This is a picture of the attack. There's the Albert-Bapaume Road in the centre, the big diagonal black line.
Okay.
And we're concentrating on the right. I don't know if you recall me saying about a thing called YSAP. Can you see that just on the road to the left of the village?
Yes.
Yep. That was the crater that they were going to date, but we're looking at the one that's on the right. The thing that makes this really, really different are the boxes on the right of that road and the names and the numbers that are in them.
Right.
So you can read maybe the 21st, 22nd Tyneside Scottish, Tyneside Irish.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Have you got the Grimsby Chums in there?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. These are all a new invention.
Right.
If you go back to that picture that we saw in one of the earlier episodes of Kitchener, the Your Country Needs You poster.
Yeah.
That mass sort of joining of the armed forces, that mass show of patriotism.
Yeah.
One of the things that was it started off by Lord Derby in Liverpool, I think, was the first person to suggest it, was you could encourage recruitment by saying to people, if you join with your friends from your local area, you will serve with your friends from your local area. And it led to the sort of a bit like not an arms race, but a bit like a sort of a one-upmanship kind of thing.
Right.
Where once Lord Derby had suggested this, and then somebody said, well, I shall raise a battalion as well, and I shall raise a battalion because I am so patriotic. So people, philanthropic people or affluent people or influential people started to raise these PALS battalions as they became known. Yeah. And so the Tyneside Irish, the Tyneside Scottish became battalions within the Northumberland Fusiliers Regiment.
Right.
But they were all lads who worked together, lived together, housed together from the same villages, etc.
Often brothers.
And brothers, fathers. There's a number of cemeteries I've been to where there are multiple fatalities that are brothers. Right. From battalions, but also there are some where there are father and son fatalities. Not so much in the PALS battalions, but just through service, but friends. Yeah. And we talked about, why does everyone know about the Somme? Well, because Geoffrey Malin's made a film about it, blah, blah. But this was an aspect that, once again, made the Somme new, notorious.
And what a mistake. You can see it, can't you? From a marketing perspective and from a recruitment perspective and from a kind of, PR perspective, that is like, in theory, it's a great idea. Because you're going to get that kind of camaraderie that you won't find definitely. But at the same, but the after effect, given what happened, catastrophic to communities.
I think it's a little bit harsh with that, the 2020 hindsight, to turn around and say, but if only they... Because the battle plan was perfect.
Yeah.
We're going to pulverise the Germans with artillery for a week.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to blow key positions up, and then our infantry will walk forward and occupy the devastated holes that are full of German corpses.
Mm-hmm.
The problem was the Germans had prepared,
Yeah.
and their deep bunkers meant they didn't get killed, and our artillery barrage was not effective. And so the belief in success wasn't necessarily misplaced at the moment when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it happened, it was too late for it to unhappen. But as you say, and so the Somme is notable because, town, city, Salford,
Salford, Pals.
Newcastle.
Accrington, Pals.
At the very north end of the battle, at near a place called Serre, is where the Accrington Pals, the Leeds Pals, etc., attacked.
So these are all Northerners.
Yeah.
Is this a?
No,
is
it's
this
not.
a theme?
No, there's lots of
Essex Pals.
lots of London regiments.
Oh,
London Regiment had a lot of Pals in it as well, But the problem was they became when they had catastrophic casualties, they were all from one community.
Yeah, of course.
And it was just devastating.
Oh, God,
it was analogous to a military sort of a mining disaster.
of course.
There's a huge colliery fire, colliery accident, 250 men
Aberfan,
underground dead.
Yeah, it's
sort of thing.
Yeah.
Poof. So that's what really makes this bit
In one day.
In one day, yeah. In one day,
God.
and
so all these guys did the same attack, the same day, the same time as the other guys.
Yeah.
And that made up for that like huge loss of life.
Yeah,
And
that's the 59,000 casualties in one day. And there's aspects of this that, like you say, are not so immediately obvious. So you've got multiple battalions heading forward. So the first wave will go in at 8 o'clock. The next wave is scheduled to go in at 7:30. The next wave is scheduled to go in at 7:50. So let's say, so the first wave doesn't get to its objective and capture it and go firm on it.
No.
So they get either killed in no man's land, or people who get wounded end up back in their own frontline trenches trying to get out of it.
Yeah.
Which means the frontline trenches aren't empty.
No.
Which means the soldiers following can't get down the trenches to get to the frontline trench.
Yeah.
So what do they do? And this is what happens in a battlefield between these two, a place called Newfoundland Park.
Right.
The Newfoundland Regiment get out, and they have to get out by their third line and actually advance across open ground before they get to their front line, because all the other trenches are full of wounded people. And so they suffer massive casualties even before they get to the start line, kind of thing, No. So it is a proper disaster, and because it's so organised and prescriptive and scheduled, no one can kind of stop it. And no one at the back is getting the information about the disaster in sufficiently good time to be able to call the halt.
It's like that kind of conveyor belt of like, in my head now I've just got a conveyor belt of boxes just going dumf 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 dumf, and it's just and no one's hit the stop button.
That's happening. You're not able to hit the stop button because you're with the stop button 5 miles away.
Yeah, you're the plan you have.
You can't see the boxes falling.
You can't
over.
Stop it,
and nobody can get in touch with you quick.
No, and there's all hell breaking.
Nothing happens quick in this.
No, of course.
In compared to our modern world.
No. So how does this change the game? So that's where we're getting to. How does the fact that this has happened, that must lead to a better organisation, as you alluded to before, and obviously it does, because
what happens is a bit of politics, really, in my opinion.
Okay.
It's not so much to do with the Battle of the Somme, because the Battle of the Somme continues, and these formations that have been destroyed are taken out of the line and are replaced by other formations, and we don't have the same style of attack in the same way, so we don't get the same intensity of casualties. This was meant to be the single big push.
Shock and
whereas
all.
Now we start adopting a policy. It's actually referred to, Rawlinson's original plan is what was called bite and hold.
Right.
So you pick a limited objective,
Yeah.
you put all your resources into the objective, you capture that objective and you hold it.
Yeah.
Then you do the same again and again, chunk by chunk, and then 6 months later you've advanced 8 miles down the road to Bapaume.
8 miles?
Yeah. It may be a bit shorter, maybe about 6.
In 8 months?
Yeah. You don't want to rush it. But it's a very different strategy. Like I say, Haig had this optimism, this sort of you know, and you have to have a degree of it to be the commander. You can't go to the fellas, can you, say, look, we're going to do the same plan every day, and a load of you will get killed, and that'll be the way it is. And eventually, we'll run out of soldiers before we do. You've got to pretend that this might be the one, fellas.
Yeah.
But his big plan of attack meant that the guns were spread out over too big an area, so there wasn't enough intensity of fire, and you know. And this is what I'm saying about the British Army learning on the Somme.
Yes.
Yeah, they learn on the Somme so that later on there is just withering firepower.
Okay.
Sort of thing. But things that happen here, they happen up and down the Somme. So the first waves go in, they get absolutely mullered by the German defensive fire. They can't get through the wire. The Germans put down counter battery fire. So you advance towards my trenches and my machine guns are killing you.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really the problem. The problem is that my artillery is firing behind you.
Right.
So now you're trapped in a ground where you can't go backwards because you'll go through an artillery barrage and be killed. You can't go forwards.
You just
can't go round it. Can't go under it. Can't go. You know, it's like
you're trapped.
Yeah, we're all going on a lion hunt or whatever. Something. You know, and so the soldiers just get destroyed.
Right.
And by midday, the Germans, ironically, by midday-ish sort of time, early afternoon, the Germans are starting to conserve their firepower because they know they know the British are finished. They know there is no more combat power on the British side today. Save our ammunition, because if they're coming back at any other time, we got to be prepared again. But really, that they know that they've won hands down on day one, and it's a shame.
Let's go back to your village, because I know you've been on the ground down there, and you know it's again a beautiful part of the world now, ironically. Boisiel. Talk a bit about when you went down there, what happened, because there's quite a nice story you've got there.
So this is an overlay map showing the modern ground with the village of La Boiselle tucked on the left-hand side there. You can see the Lochnagar crater out to the right, that funny thing with the little squiggly red German trench line going underneath it. And in the middle of La Boiselle, there's that sort of green area. If I just point to it on a map, I'll put a stick to it and then I'll come back and talk about it.
Okay. That middle bit there. There he is. Okay.
So that bit where the end of the stick is pointing to is this area that's referred to as the Glory Hole in contemporary maps. It's a bit of a strange name.
Wow.
You know, the Le Îlot, as the French refer to it. The Îlot, the Glory Hole. And it's the tip of where the German army reached in their 1914 invasion.
Okay.
So in 1914, the French were defending this part of the countryside, and this is like the high water mark of the Germans.
Right.
In towards Albert. They never actually got to Albert. They got this far and kind of it stopped. And so they captured the village, fortified it, and stayed there. And the French tried to get them out by digging mines underneath the front line and blowing them up. And the Germans did the same to the French. And so this area ended up like a honeycomb of mines and craters and whatever. There's there was a building there, a farm, which the Germans referred to as the Granathof, the grenade farm, because it was blown to smithereens. It just vanished, kind of thing. But I was walking back from the Lochnagar crater, and if you look as you're looking at the map, if you come down from the Lochnagar crater towards the bottom of the map, you can see like some pale patches on the ground.
Yeah.
There's a little footpath that comes along there, and I'm strolling back along this footpath. I'll just point it out actually, because
okay, to the south. Cool.
So I'm walking back towards roughly where the point of the stick is now. And I got chatting to this lady. She had a couple of Labradors, just sort of saw the dogs. And, it's like, you see somebody with a dog, you say hello to the dog, and it's all very pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got chatting to her, and I'm not a very big French speaker. I'm not a fluent French speaker at all. And she was French, but she spoke reasonably good English. And between us, we could have a bit of a conversation. And I was saying, I've been out and about looking around the battlefields. She said, oh, that's interesting. I said, and she said, where are you from? And I said, oh, I'm from Wales. I'm from North Wales. She goes, oh, my husband's from South Wales, but we went to North Wales on our honeymoon. And then she was chatting about having ice cream in Nino's ice cream parlour in Ross-on-Sea. And I said, I know exactly where that is. We were chatting away and got on really, really well. It was really pleasant. She had lovely dogs. And as we walked back to this Îlot, this fenced-off field of mounds and craters and stuff. You know, with a couple of sheep in it, and that's it. But no one goes in because it's fenced off.
Right.
I said to her, I said, "Oh, I'd love to go in here." I said, "You know, it really interests me because I know in here there are excavated mine tunnels, just like the ones where the Hawthorne Ridge crater and the Loch Nagar crater, where they've gone off. But these were never detonated. They're just in there as part of the end." She says, "Well, why don't you go in?" And I said, "Well, because it's private." And she goes, "Yes, but I'm the landowner."
Ah.
So inadvertently, I'd bumped into the person who owned the property. And there was also a group of people there. There was a guy and maybe 3 or 4 other people there. And she said, "Oh, that's Ian or Dave or whoever it was with a group." And there was a battlefield guide with a group of sort of clients showed there. And so she introduced me. And within the space of about 20 minutes, I'd gone from walking along a country lane to finding myself with a hard hat and a miner's lamp on, heading underground to go and see these tunnels. And I've got some contemporary pictures of the things.
Wow. This is fascinating. I mean, you know, this is just like, I mean, look at that. I mean, we're into proper engineering.
That's actually looking back uphill from the adit, the sort of sloping diagonal tunnel that goes in under the ground initially, and you can see on the floor there's like some little grooves. That's where they would have had a wooden railway.
Okay, wooden.
Yeah, so they didn't want anything to make as much, too much noise, too much clanking around. So they would have had a wooden railway there, and I don't know if you can see, well, you can see them across the corridors there. There's little steps, little gaps in it, and that was because it was going uphill. That's for the earth sappers, or they actually used a lot of infantry soldiers just as labourers.
Right.
So when they're pushing the tubs full of excavated chalk back up, they can get a bit of grip on the floor. Remember we were saying about if the floor got wet, it got a bit slippery.
Yeah.
They'd be able to push up on those things to get them up. So we went down these things with these guys. You go down, and they've shored up. These are some contemporary photos. From the photos I took, but the contemporary ones now, they've shored it up. They've got steel RSJ kind of girdering in there, and they've got a winch organised, so you can then drop from here. You drop 80 feet into the proper mine gallery, and then it radiates out. And it was just absolutely fantastic, you know, to go down. And it was just purely by chance
that you were there.
That I was there, and it just kind of happened.
Claudie.
Yeah.
Wow. Who's this? What's this?
And these are some contemporary pictures. These are what some of the miners used to look like. These were civilian miners. They realised this tunnelling thing was so important.
Yeah.
That they needed experts. So a guy called John Norton Griffiths, who was a friend of Kitchener,
right?
He was an engineer. He was the man who had built the Manchester sewers,
right,
and some of the London sewers. Started recruiting tunnellers from mining communities and civilian tunnelling companies.
Right.
So the ones in Manchester and in London, they were known as clay kickers, and their job, you like when somebody used to take a narrow boat through a canal tunnel, they'd have the people would lie on their backs and walk down the walls. That sort of posture, and they would lie on their backs and push a wooden probe into the clay and carve a little block out. And so he would catch the block of clay and then put it into a bag, and that's how they dug the tunnel secretly, in silence, by using these clay kickers. Or here on the Somme, they used more like coal miners or quarrying type people, because it was rock, they had to dig it out.
Yeah.
And this was just an example of 2 of them who were involved in this process. But at the glory hole, it's really quite poignant. Actually, there's a couple of miners who are still entombed underground. It wasn't as straightforward as dig a hole, get under the enemy, and blow them up. The enemy would try and track you down.
How would you do that? No.
So this is a picture of an engineer, a British engineer, using a thing called a geophone. So what it is a bit like a stethoscope with 2 sort of sensors on it.
Right.
And when the person's chipping away with their pickaxe or whatever in the tunnel, you listen to it, you can detect it, and then you move the geophone hearing pieces until you get the same volume in each ear.
Right.
And then when you get the same volume, you know that the two sensors are the same distance from the digging. So if you join them together with a line, the digging must be at 90 degrees to that line in that direction. So you'd have I was saying I went down the glory hole, and you go down onto the proper mining level when you get off the adit. You'd have a transverse set of tunnel that would be parallel with your front lines, and then tunnels sticking out.
Yeah.
And what you would do in each of those tunnels, you'd have somebody listening, and when they detected sounds, they'd get an officer down there with the geophone, take a compass bearing as to where it's coming from, go to the next one, take a compass bearing where it's coming from.
Right.
They'd have they'd have tunnels at different heights as well,
Right.
so they could triangulate to where the digging was from. And then what you would have done under your lines is you would have pre-prepared tunnels, and you'd pick the one that was closest to where the enemy were digging,
Right.
and you'd kind of dig your tunnel towards his until you could get close enough. So let's say you and I are the tunnellers.
Yeah, yeah.
You're the German tunneler, you're
Yeah.
the enemy tunneler, I'm the British tunneler, and we're this far apart.
Right.
I would drill a hole probably half of the way to you.
What with?
With an
With
auger.
an auger?
Bit
With
like
a hand auger?
Yeah, like a hand auger bit, or like the sort of thing you'd have for putting a fence post in.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, drill it, get out the hole, or even just pack the chamber with explosives, and then backfill it with sandbags to make sure the blast went your way.
Right.
And then I'd just blow it in. But if I was really clever,
Right.
what I'd do is I'd make sure I'd have two of these organised.
Right.
Yeah, one a little bit further away.
Oh, no. So you.
So I'd blast you in,
Yeah.
and because you're underground, people would come to rescue you,
And you blast them.
and then I'd blast them in as well.
Oh no.
So once
That
again,
is
we have an
grim.
episode where we have a bit of evil, unpleasant, nasty shenanigans going on. The underground war was fought continuously during this period, quite intensely and quite barbarically.
That's horrendous.
Yeah, it was.
And again, for people who are watching this for the first time, and like myself,
Yeah.
the reason for doing this podcast is the fact that I literally did not know this. I mean, and I can say here and you sit here and say, "Oh, yeah, no, you've told me," but I have not heard this before, and that is A, fascinating, and B,
But
just
the thing. One of the things I think is very interesting about it is this guy is almost certainly a Royal Engineer officer, but much of the labouring work was done by infantry soldiers, just common guard and infantry soldiers. Picking, moving, carrying, humping.
yeah.
The technical digging, the tunnelling, and the digging and the mining
Yeah.
was done by civilian miners who had been co-opted into the army. They weren't conscripted; they were volunteers, but they underwent no military training at all.
Really?
So the first ones were taken to Chatham in London.
Right.
Excuse me. Were attested, were sworn into the service of the army,
Right.
and were in France within 48 hours digging tunnels. They went from being civilian labourers, and when the phrase, you must have heard the phrase that soldiers earn the king's shilling,
Yes.
sort of thing. They didn't earn a shilling; they were earning like 6 or 7 shillings a day because they were so essential.
Yeah.
That the government paid them extra money, even though they were in the army as such. They had no military training, nothing. They were sent there to dig tunnels.
Is there obviously there must be documentation, but is there where did they make a corps or did they make a
Tunnelling companies they were referred to.
Okay.
They effectively came under a Royal Engineers cap badge. They were Royal Engineers. They were in the Corps Royal Engineers.
Did they have their own medal? Was there any?
But they were formed into tunnelling companies.
Right.
About like 100 men each,
Yeah.
sort of thing, 200 men. That's it. And they, unlike the line infantry battalions who rotated in and out of the line, they were sent to specific places with a tunnelling task, and they stayed there pretty much until it was done, or they were replaced by another tunnelling company,
Right.
which finished the job off.
Yeah,
It wasn't like they didn't work for sort of 2 or 3 days in the line, then come out. The tunnelling company stayed.
Okay.
They didn't stay in the line. They personally came out, but their unit, their
unit.
formation stayed on that task until that task was completed.
What an absolutely grim
Oh,
task.
if you go to Ypres, there's a guy called Boothby, and his descendants found, I think it's his grandson, found his, I'm sure his name's Boothby, found his diary, and he joined the army, volunteered in the rush sort of thing. I think he was an officer training corps or something, but he volunteered in the rush, went off, joined the Royal Engineers, ended up in tunnelling near Hoog, when we were talking about them on the map earlier. Hoog.
Yeah.
Ended up tunnelling there. And he kept this lovely correspondence going with his girlfriend at home. And it was all about him coming home on leave and blah, blah, blah. And the last letter he sends is on whatever day. And within 2 days later, he's entombed under the ground and is never recovered. And the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, you must have heard of, they produce all the gigantic white cemeteries that are there, and the Menin Gate, and where there is the Royal Engineers Memorial on the Belluardo Ridge, and it's got names of about, I don't know, a dozen, maybe 30 people on it, and they are all missing, entombed under the hillside somewhere in mines that have been blown in by German camouflages. That's the name for this charge that blows the mine in. A camouflage, yeah. And it's a properly barbaric. And it has all, people think about the gas being a terrible thing. Gas doesn't cause masses of casualties, but it's still something that engenders a feeling of horror in us. Yeah. The miasma that comes to get us. I think the underground war, from my perspective, the darkness, the claustrophobia, the being entombed. It has a whole set of sinister phobias about it.
I mean, I've been, locally here, both yourself, I know you've done caving and climbing and all kinds of stuff. I'm over my time as living back here and working back here in North Wales, I've worked in the copper mine on the Llandudno no Great Orme, and some of the tunnels down there, which have been dug by man, they are just like, as someone that gets claustrophobic, it is frightening.
And looking on the bright side, at least you haven't got Fritz 3 yards away trying to blow you in. It's a bit grim. So our second visit to the Somme is a bit dark, a bit samey, but a bit different as well. Certainly from my perspective, meeting Claudian actually ended up inside Wyatt and stuff was just incredible. Being in the right place at the right time, it was just fantastic, and it's really opened up a whole new bit of interest for me.
Yeah, well, and really. You won't get that by looking in a book.
No.
You will get that by, as you say, going to these places, getting a feeling for these places, getting your feet on the ground, and walking and talking to people in these places.
If you look at the map that we could get up on the screen now, if Matt can sort that out for us, it's got the British trench lines and the German trench lines drawn on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Put that there. It's got all the trench lines drawn on it, and you can get something like this off the internet, or you could order it by mail order or whatever.
Yeah.
You can even get it on a 3D mapping program, so you can actually fly through this as a 3D virtual landscape if you wanted to.
Right.
But until you see that ground, until you actually stand on the ground today with this map in your hand, saying I'm now, or an electronic version, I'm now in the German trenches or the British trench lines here, and you see where the trenches are, where the Germans were always on this reverse slope, just slightly out of sight from anybody else, but there was other German trenches you could oversee the ground in front of there. The engineering thinking behind it is incredible, and when you see that, you then start to get some degree of understanding of the other testimony that you have. It starts to make sense, and you have, like I said earlier, you have that empathy with this is what it is. I look at this, and I people like yourself say, well, the first day of the Battle of the Somme, it was terrible. There were 59,000 casualties, 20,000 dead, blah, blah, blah. I imagined this to be like a grand scale mugging.
Right.
And what I mean by that is the British soldiers were prepared that the Germans had been pulverised. It was often referred to by British soldiers before that. It's going to be a cakewalk. Right. It's going to be easy peasy. It's going to be a doddle, mate. Don't rush. Nobody runs. Everyone walks. The Germans will be dead. There might be the odd sniper and the odd German to bayonet or something, but it's all going to be finished. Easy peasy. They get up out of their trenches. They walk forward. They're suddenly hit by artillery fire behind them, destroying their mates, withering machine gun, and all the testimonies. They're being scythed down, cut down like wheat. Yeah. And in that instant, I just imagine these soldiers experiencing a mugging.
Yeah.
I'm walking down the road and somebody's just grabbed my bag and
Jump.
run off with it, and my first instinct will be to go, "I'm sorry, mate. Was I in your way?"
Yeah.
I'd have no comprehension of what was happening.
Yeah.
And I think these soldiers in Kitchener's army, the Hague's army, the volunteer, the new army,
The pals.
the pals would have just been there and suddenly thought, "Crikey, what is happening here?" I just don't have the capacity to understand this in this instant what is going on, and that shock of action, that shock of battle.
Yeah.
I think once you see the ground, once you go there, you get the testimony, and you start to put all these little nuggets together.
Mm-hmm.
You then get a sense of understanding, and then when you go to a cemetery, you're not seeing a series of Portland headstones.
No.
You're starting to see a series of people who were just ordinary people. They weren't all the heroes that sometimes people think. They were ordinary, average people, but they're all here because they all went through that desperate momentary experience of this battle, the Somme, the first day. But as I say, it does get better, because the day after they don't make the same mistake again, and the day after they've learned from the 2 days before, and by day 90 they've got 89 days of learning behind them, and so they get better and stop. But I'll leave you with an interesting one.
Go on.
Just my last little bit about how bad the Somme was. A little bit of a cliffhanger for you. In 1944, when the Allies invaded Normandy, the British Army's casualty rate in Normandy was higher than the British Army's casualty rate on the Somme for the whole of the campaign.
Wow.
When Bernard Law Montgomery was fighting with the British in Normandy, the attrition on the British Army was so great, it was higher than the attrition on the British Army on the Somme.
Dear God.
So when people suddenly say the Somme was the epitome of loss, it wasn't. It was kind of repeated later on, 20 odd years later.
And on that, absolute, again, thank you so much for
No problem at all. I love it.
this insight. It's fascinating for me, and I'm sure it's fascinating for our viewers, listeners, if you're on audio or on visual, or however way you're imbibing this. We should do more. This is the end of the first series. We will be coming back to many, many more times in our history with Phil and myself. But for now, do leave, like, subscribe, all of the good stuff, and please comment. We want to know what you think. If you want more of this, what kind of content you would like to see, and just, be yourselves, be brave, and we look forward to hearing from you soon and seeing you next time on Into Battle.
Get on those battlefields.
There you go. See ya.